Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Erin McCormick and I'm an education specialist here at the Solid Waste Authority of Palm Beach County. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about garbage through the ages and taking you on a journey way back in time on how did ancient civilizations handle their waste. So if this is your first time joining us, please drop us a line down in the comments about where you're from and what things you might want to hear about in the future. I'd love to hear that. Also, hit that like button and that share button so that other people that might be interested in garbage practices throughout time, they can check out this video as well. So the Solid Waste Authority of Palm Beach County was started in 1975 to manage the county's waste. And since then, we have built 2 renewable energy facilities that take your garbage and burn it and turn it into clean electricity. And we also have a recovered materials processing facility that manages all of your recyclables. We have 2 landfills, a class 1 and a class 3. That is where we deposit your ash and anything that can't be burned in our incinerators. So you can see we have quite an extensive system. Oh, we also have the biosolids pelletization processing facility, and so that's where we take care of your number 2. So if you're interested in learning more details about all of those different facilities, be sure to check out all of our programming that is here on Facebook at 11 a.m. weekdays. So let's go ahead and get started and go back in time to prehistoric times. So imagine people back in prehistoric times, they were nomadic. So that means they didn't really live in one area. And that's kind of good for trash production because if you think about it, then they're not really building up or accumulating a lot of garbage. So they're actually, anything they had was mostly biodegradable, and anything that wasn't would be left behind in these little pits. And they never really were there long enough for it to grow into a trash problem because then they would move to the next place. And then that brings us to ancient civilizations. Now now you have people that are living there for a longer period of time, but they didn't have a system in managing their waste. So really what they would do is they would finish with something and then drop it to the ground. And so imagine that. Imagine your space right now, wherever you're watching this video, whether it's work, at home, wherever. And imagine that the last thing you threw away was instead on the ground. And imagine everybody around you did the same thing. It would get pretty stinky and pretty messy, right? So what they would do is when it smelled too bad, they would just put clay over the top of it and cover up that stink. Well, what happens with garbage and clay and dirt, and as that layers, it's gonna fill up, right? So you're literally filling your space with garbage. Well, in ancient Troy, they have found out, researchers have found out that actually they had to raise the roofs of their buildings and their doorways so that people could still come in because they were filling up with trash. And the same with the roads. They would also put garbage in the roads and just cover it. And so there's layers. So it's kind of neat in a historical perspective because you can see, layers of what they put out there. But to live in that, imagine walking around all of that. I personally could not handle that. Egypt, they would actually collect their waste and dump it into the Nile River. So that's not a good idea either. We know that now, but they didn't know that back then. Greeks, they were actually the first to come up with the town dump. In 500 BCE, they organized things like municipal dumps, compost pits for all of that biodegradable stuff. And they also came up with the first laws. So waste was deposited 1 mile from city walls. So that was one of the first laws that we can find related to sanitation practices. Athens had the first known law saying that there was no trash to be put in the streets, which is pretty forward thinking of them because that's where most civilizations were putting their garbage, is just out in the streets. Chinese had a workforce that they gathered garbage from those major cities, and ancient Mayans had dumps for their organic waste, and they reused things like broken pottery and such for their building supplies. So they were already recycling their material back before they had that word recycling. And then Rome was the large city at the time, and so most of the trash, it remained in the streets. So you can imagine that that would cause a lot more problems. And so that brings us to the Middle Ages. And when Rome fell, a lot of people dispersed to more rural areas. So garbage collection wasn't an issue. But then as the Middle Ages came along, and it was back to the streets. So as we have cities and people are putting things into the streets, and animals would scavenge all of that garbage and refuse, and people were in danger of being bombarded by garbage. So imagine that you're walking out your front door that's completely covered in garbage. Well, maybe not right out the front door, maybe out in the street. And you go for a walk and your neighbor is done with something and it chucks it out the window or out the front door. You have to look for flying garbage. And that was actually a real threat back then. But one of the biggest problems back in the Middle Ages was the bubonic plague. And they thought that it came from the trash. And in a way, it did. So the trash attracted the rats. So rats would come and scavenge the garbage. And then they would have on them fleas. Well, fleas would jump from rats to people and transfer the Black Death or the bubonic plague from those rats to the people. And so that's how that spread. So they didn't necessarily realize it at the time, but garbage, their sanitation practices or lack thereof, contributed to that spread. So then we're into the Industrial Revolution. So this is the 17 and 1800s. So think about cities. The cities' populations are increasing. Sanitation practices are actually declining because there's just too many people. So European and American city streets are becoming very clogged with waste. And having this larger population meant that housing and food became very difficult to find. So you ended up with these large slums, lots of people not being able to have their needs met, all living really close together, just putting all their waste right out there. So trash production goes up just from sheer number of people. And then you have pigs running wild through the streets because they're eating the garbage that has been put there. So it's kind of counterintuitive if you think about it, but the garbage attracted the pigs and then the pigs helped eat the garbage, so they actually did a favor. So they helped to bring down some of the levels of the garbage. But disease epidemics rose, and so that pushed people to come up with some better sanitation practices and a collection of garbage. They realized that this is just not good, so we need to come up with a plan. And in the late 1700s, Benjamin Franklin in Philadelphia was the first to implement a trash removal and street cleaning process. So Americans began to dig refuse pits and they began to basically clean up the streets, which is really needed instead of throwing things out the window. New York City, so once you did all this, you would have all this garbage, you're collecting it. So where does it go? Like, you still needed somewhere to put it, right? Well, New York City dumped it in the East River, thinking the river was just going to carry it right on out to sea. But that didn't happen. It ended up on the shores of Long Island and New Jersey. So you can imagine the people there were not very happy to find the garbage back there on the shores. So in 1872, they had this brilliant idea that they were going to put it onto barges and take it out to the ocean and then dump it out there. Now we know that is not a very good idea or a good plan, but at the time that was the best that they came up with. And then in 1874, England did something to kind of change everything. They came up with an incinerator to burn the garbage. And by 1885, incinerators were used in America. Now, you would think that this incineration idea, that's what we do here at the Solid Waste Authority of Palm Beach County. You would think that we'd want to do that, right? That sounds like a great idea. We're doing it today. They did it back in 1885. Well, they did it a little differently, and they didn't have the technology that we have today. And so they had problems with it. They had problems in that the trash was not completely burned and that they'd have a lot of wet trash. So if you think about your garbage or your dumpsters or whatever, there's a lot of liquid in there. And so wet stuff does not burn. So to speed up that burning process, they would put coal. Well, now that's more expensive because you're burning coal. You have to buy the coal to put in there to burn the trash. So that wasn't working out too well for them. And so the last thing was they also realized that all of this burning process puts out a lot more smoke, and it really damages the air, right? And so they didn't have pollution control systems like we do today. So they ended up stop using the incinerators because of all these problems. And they did this process called stewing wet garbage. So they took stewed wet garbage and they basically heated it up in a big liquidy soupy thing, and they used it to create fertilizer or a type of soap. But you can imagine if you heat up garbage and it's a wet, soupy mess, that it's gonna smell really bad. So eventually they stopped doing that too. So that got us to the 1900s though. In the early 1900s, we need to figure out what to do with the garbage because it had become very aware, people have become very aware that garbage is the carries the disease-causing germs, like leaving the garbage out there to decompose, and it's not just the smells, it's the garbage itself. So the first public health department was created, and regular trash collection and street cleaning began. And so they wanted to promote a healthy, clean environment. So this is really great. We've got a great plan, early 1900s. However, the US was creating now more garbage than ever. In 1912, New York City actually produced enough garbage to fill 140 Washington monuments. That is a lot of garbage from one city. So what did they do with it? Well, they had several different places it went. It either went into town dumps, it went into bodies of water, rivers, lakes, it went in to fill ravines, and it was sometimes burned in open pits. So lots of ways to get rid of it, but not. So by the mid-1900s, we're coming up with some new ideas because this is just not working. Dumps and landfills are filling up. So they came up with the idea of sanitary landfills, where you cover the landfill, like when you put the garbage, you cover with a layer of dirt. And that's kind of what we did here too with our landfills. But it's much more detailed what we've done. And now we're mostly putting ash, so we don't really have the smell problem anymore. And then incineration. So they did figure out, okay, let's go back to incineration. And that's reducing the volume of garbage, but now it's still polluting the air. So we have to, figure out the happy medium here, right? And now the dumps are filling up faster, the landfills are filling up, people aren't reusing, because if you think about it, think about all the packaging and all the stuff in the mid-1900s to the late 1900s that were developed. So think about even just, your cereal. It comes in a box, in a bag. So there's a bag that you have to throw away and a box. Recycle the box and throw the bag away. That cuts your garbage down, your waste down. So, but think about all of the material and all of the stuff that you use today that you throw away. It's a one-time use and throw away, because we're a very big society on convenience. So the amount of garbage that we're producing is getting to be really, really, really high. So let's go ahead and think about today with Palm Beach County. So in Palm Beach County, we have to manage about 17 million pounds of solid waste every single day. So that's about 27 feet high in a football field. So a big football field filled with garbage piled 27 feet high. The goalposts are 30 feet high. So that means that it's almost to the top of the goalposts. So that's a lot of garbage. And so the way we do that is we do have some of that includes our recycling, and then the garbage gets burned, and we have a state-of-the-art waste to energy plant. So now we're not just burning it in open pits, we're actually burning it, and that garbage is serving as fuel to power our turbines, or let's say heat up the water to turn it to steam to power our turbines. And we create electricity. We actually make enough electricity to power 70 to 75,000 homes every single year. We also power all of our buildings off of Jog Road. So now we're using that garbage as something valuable because we all use electricity clearly. And then now we have a 90% reduction in volume, and we take that and we put that out on the landfill. And so our landfills are actually scheduled to close in the year 2053. And that's because they're gonna be full. We're gonna have taken up all the space that we've been permitted. Now, if we come up with another use for our ash, which there's programs in the works of using our ash for building roads, or mixing in with concrete, that kind of thing. If those types of things get approved, imagine how much longer our landfills will last. And that's really important for us here in Palm Beach County because we have a lot of people here. We are the third most populous county. And so we need a place, and we're the largest in terms of geographical size. So we need, we got to figure out what to do with this waste, because I certainly don't want to go back in time and be walking outside with a whole bunch of garbage in the streets. So I hope that you enjoyed that little walk through history. And if you have any questions, please, please, please type them in the comments. I would love to answer them for you. And if you have questions after this broadcast, feel free to email us at education@swa.org. Also, you can check out our website at www.swa.org/education. and I would love to connect with you. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope that you have a wonderful day.